האם זה באמת סגולה בדוקה? הסגולה ללמוד בזה?
Erev Tov, Dober V'Yetcher. Good evening. We are in the Zera Shimshon on Parsha Tetzaveh. We're going to be doing Os Aleph. It's a pretty long piece, so we're not going to complete the entire piece, but God willing, we'll be able to do the vast majority of the piece. And before we start, we're going to look at two psukim. One is the last pasuk in Parshas Truma, which is, of course, last week's Parsha, and then the first pasuk in this week's Parsha of Tetzaveh. So let's, because the Zera Shimshon is going to talk about how those two things connect, the end of Parshas Truma and the beginning of Parshas Tetzaveh. So here we go with the last pasuk in Parshas Truma. L'chol klei hamishkan v'chol avodaso, for all of the utensils of the Mishkan and all of its work, v'chol yisedosav, v'chol yistois hachotzer nechoshes, and all of its pegs and all of the pegs of the courtyard, nechoshes, should be made of nechoshes, of copper. So that's the last pasuk in Truma, that a certain amount of things were made with copper. Now the first pasuk in Tetzaveh. V'ato tetzaves b'nei Yisrael, and you should command b'nei Yisrael, v'yikchu elech Hashem and zayis zoch, and they should bring to you pure olive oil, kosis lamaor, which is pressed for illumination, which is made for lighting, lehalos ner tomid, to raise up an eternal flame or a constant flame. So those are the two psukim, and let's get right into the Zera Shimshon. Darshinon shapir smichos haparshios. There is a wonderful drasha made about the connection between the two parshios, meaning the parsha, the end of Parshas Truma and the beginning of Parshas Tetzaveh. Sheroshe tevos nechoshes. Because if we look at the word copper, nechoshes, we can view it as an abbreviation. Ner, chodesh, shkolim, tireh. Ner, of course, is a candle. Chodesh means month. Shkolim is a coin that was very commonly used in the time of the Torah. Tireh, you will see. So the Zera Shimshon starts off by saying, let's take the last word in Parshas Truma, the word nechoshes that we just saw a moment ago, the word for copper, and turn it into and view it as an abbreviation that stands for ner, candle, chodesh, month, shkolim, coins, tireh, you will see. Ve'ata tetzaveh, and then from the word nechoshes, meaning representing those four things, we go right into the parsha of Tetzaveh, this week's Torah parsha. Ve'hem ashlosha devorim, and those three things mentioned in the word nechoshes, those three things, sheniskashe Moshe bohem. Moshe had difficulty with them. Lefi mashikosav Rashi beferish HaChumash, according to what Rashi wrote in his commentary on Chumash, va'ayin b're'eim u'v'chedushe agodos marsha, and you can look for further details about the Rashis in those commentaries. But let's pause for a moment. It's very likely that we have in our memory bank somewhere the idea that Rashi said Moshe had certain problems, certain challenges with things that were told to him at certain specific occasions, and Hashem had to illustrate for him or give him more information, etc. For example, the menorah is a very famous example that Moshe had some problem with constructing the menorah, and so Hashem showed him an example of what the menorah should look like. And we also might remember the one about the machzis shekel, the half shekel coin, and Hashem showed him a half shekel coin made out of fire. And so this idea that there were certain things that Moshe wasn't sure how to make is illustrated here, is demonstrated here with the ner chodesh shkolim tireh. Hashem signals to Moshe, you will see something, a lesson about the ner, the candle from the menorah, the chodesh, the idea of Rosh Chodesh, and shkolim. Rosh Chodesh is another thing where Hashem showed Moshe the little sliver of the moon and said, this, when you see this in the sky, that's when you should know that the new month is starting and you should sanctify the new month, the new moon. So those three things were problematic for Moshe, And that somehow is going to connect the end of Parshas Truma with the beginning of Parshas Tetzaveh. Next paragraph. Ulefi shebeparsha zo lo nizkir bo shem Moshe. Since in this Parsha of Tetzaveh, Moshe's name is not mentioned, Nira Lomar, it would appear that we can say, Shahashlosha Devorim Sheniskashem Moshe Bohem. The three things that Moshe had a problem with, that created a difficulty for Moshe, Lo Hoya Hakoshi Mitzad Atzmam. The problem that Moshe had wasn't from the things themselves, Dekama Devorim Yoser Chamurim Me'elu, because there are many things that were much more complicated, much more difficult to understand than these three things of the menorah and the Kiddush HaChodesh and the shkolim, the half shekel mitzvah. Many other topics were much more complicated. Haven miyad, and Moshe understood them immediately. Ela hakoshi hoya, but rather the difficulty with these three things was mipnei shehayu nosnim lo remez, because each of these things served as a hint to him, al misaso chutzo la'aretz, that he would die outside of the land of Israel, that he would not be able to go into Eretz Yisrael, and that he would die before entering the land of Israel. So let's pause for a moment, because obviously that's a very powerful idea and a concept if you have not heard it before. Zera Shimshon is saying that when we talk about, in three different places in Chumash, in three different times when we learn the Torah, and we learn about these three things that presented a unique challenge to Moshe, Zera Shimshon is saying it wasn't because they were difficult for Moshe to understand how to make the menorah, for example, or how to do Kiddush HaChodesh, or how to fulfill the mitzvah of Machzis HaShekel, of the donations of the half shekel coins. That's not what was going on, the Zera Shimshon just taught us. What was going on is each of those three things somehow contained an allusion to the fact that Moshe was going to die before going into Eretz Yisrael. He was not going to lead the people into Eretz Yisrael, and that's what presented the difficulty to him. Next paragraph. V'nitan lo remez zeh sholosh pe'amim, and a hint was given to him about his death, when it would take place, three different times, regarding the menorah, regarding the half shekel, and regarding the Kiddush HaChodesh. Why was it given to him three times? Lefi shegam hu b'shlosha devarim, because he also, with three things, Mona mimenu kenisas haaretz, he prevented himself from entering the land. Kidiisa b'meforshim uv'midrashim, as it states in commentaries and in midrashim, v'ayin b'zohar Parshas Bereshis, and look in the Zohar for more about this on Parshas Bereshis. Three things that Moshe did prevented him from going into Eretz Yisrael. Harishon, who the first one was Kisha Omar Shalach no biyad tishloch. When Moshe said to Hashem, send please with the one that you usually send. For this pasuk, we need to go back in our mind's eye to when Moshe was standing at the Sneh HaBoer Ba'esh, at the burning bush, and Hashem was communicating to Moshe that Hashem had chosen him to go back to Mitzrayim and lead the Bnei Yisrael out of servitude, out of bondage. And Moshe gave reasons why he wasn't the right person. And there was a kind of dialogue, maybe even an argument, but let's call it a dialogue between Moshe and Hashem about whether or not Moshe was the right person to go, whether he was worthy to go. And at one point, Moshe said, Shalach no biyad tishloch, send please the one you usually send, which Chazal teach us was a reference to his brother Aharon. And Hashem responded and said, yes, I'll also send Aaron. Aaron is actually coming to greet you, and you'll go together with Aaron on this mission. But because Moshe didn't immediately accept the mission and instead said, send my brother Aaron, send someone else, that was viewed as a problem by Hashem, and the first reason why Moshe did not merit to go into Eretz Yisrael. Hasheni, the second thing, Loma Hareoso. why have you done evil to this people? And that pasuk refers to when Moshe and Aaron both came to Paro for the very first time, and they told him about that it was Hashem's command that he released the people, the Jewish people, to have a festival in the Midbar, to go and leave Mitzrayim and to go out into the Midbar and serve Hashem in the Midbar, in the wilderness. And Hashem said Paro said, that is really not a good request. And I'm going to make things harder for the Jewish people by taking away the teven, taking away the straw. And now they have to make the same amount of bricks as they did when we used to give them the straw. So the people were very demoralized and disheartened that now Moshe and Aaron went to Paro. They expected all kinds of great things. They perhaps expected to immediately go free. And instead, their work and their lives were made much harder, and the bondage and the servitude suffering increased. So Moshe said to Hashem, Lama Harioso, why have you done something bad to the people? That was the second issue that resulted in Moshe not being able to go into Eretz Yisrael. V'hashlishi, and the third thing, Kishekibel ha'erev rav. When Moshe decided to accept the mixed multitude, the Erev Rav, that's a term that refers to non-Jews who came to Moshe in a large number, and they said, we want to accompany you. We want to go with you on your journey, on your adventure. We want to go with you. And Moshe allowed them to come. Vigarmu, and they caused, top of the next column, Li Yisrael lasos ha'egel, and they caused the Jewish people to make the egel hazohav. We know from Chazal that it was the Erev Rav, this mixed multitude of people, of non-Jews who joined the Jewish people in leaving Mitzrayim and the Yetzias Mitzrayim, who initiated and pushed for the making of the golden calf. Umesu b'midbar, because of the sin of the egel, the whole generation died out in the midbar. Bishvil shechozar yetzer hara limakomo, because the act of making the egel hazohav brought back the yetzer hara into its original place, kanoda, as is well known, and you can see the reference there to the Gemara where this idea comes from in Maseches Avodah Zarah. What's being referred to over there in the Gemara is that when Hashem first gave the first of the Aseres Hadibros, the first of the mitzvos on Har Sinai of Anochi Hashem, I am Hashem, the power of that moment knocked out the Yetzer Hara from Klal Yisrael. It neutralized the Yetzer Hara. So they did not have a Yetzer Hara. And imagine what an incredible state of affairs that must have led to. There was no more Yetzer Hara. People could just easily and simply serve Hashem without any evil inclination. However, when the Egel HaZohav, when the golden calf was constructed, the Yetzer Hara came back and returned in full force. Ultimately, that led to all kinds of averos and sins and complainings and problems, and also resulted in the Chet HaMeraglim and the Jewish people having to spend 40 years wandering in the wilderness and dying out, the first generation dying out before the children and the grandchildren, the new generation, was able to enter the land of Israel. So the Zera Shimshon is saying those three things, those three episodes, were the reasons that Moshe wasn't allowed to go into Eretz Yisrael. Now, of course, many of us might be thinking, wait a minute, I thought he couldn't go into Eretz Yisrael because he hit the rock. Zera Shimshon addresses that in the next paragraph. Avol, however, hachet shel mei meriva, the sin committed at the place called mei meriva, the waters of strife, hu inyan acher. That's a different thing. Shem mechamas zeh, because of that transgression, that action of Moshe's when he struck the rock instead of speaking to the rock, nishpa hakodesh baruch hu. Hashem took an oath at that point. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, lochein lo saviu, therefore you will not bring the people into the promised land. Ve'ein lochein el shavua, and the word lochein, therefore, only represents an oath. The word lochein is used to represent that an oath was taken. Hashem took an oath at that point that Moshe would not be able to enter Eretz Yisrael. V'shuv, and after that, lo hoya lo takona, Moshe had no way to fix matters laharbos bisvila, to do a tremendous amount of davening, ulevatel hagezera, and to nullify the decree that Hashem had originally made. Let's pause again, because once again, we have a very powerful and fundamental idea being presented to us by the Zera Shimshon. Zera Shimshon is saying that if we have thought or understood things in the Torah until now, before now, to say that it was the sin of striking the rock that led Moshe to Hashem to tell Moshe that he couldn't go into Eretz Yisrael, Zera Shimshon saying that is a misconception. That is an incorrect way of understanding what happened. The correct way that he's presenting to us to understand the events is as follows: that Moshe did three things, which were listed in the previous paragraph, that caused Hashem to say, Moshe, you're not going to be able to go into Eretz Yisrael. Had things stopped there, had there been no further issues or problems, then Moshe would have been able and allowed to daven as he did several times and get the decree against him retracted, and he could have been allowed to go into Eretz Yisrael. However, when the episode of the Mei Meriva, the hitting the rock, happened, Hashem then took an oath that he would not be able to go into Eretz Yisrael, and therefore all of Moshe's davening did not suffice to enable the decree to be rescinded. And so Moshe was ultimately, of course, as we know, not allowed to go into Eretz Yisrael. But the whole problem started with the three issues, the things, the two statements that Moshe made, which were not considered by Hashem to be appropriate statements by Moshe, uttered by Moshe, and also his acceptance of the Erev Rav that caused so many incredibly serious problems for Bnei Yisrael. Next paragraph. Umitchila Moshe niskasha b'moled halavana. From the start, meaning the first time Moshe had a problem, it was b'moled halavana. It was with the birth, so to speak, of the new moon. It was with the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, of sanctifying the new month and the new moon. Shehi remez lemalchusan shel Yisrael, because it hints to the kingship of the Jewish people, and we'll see more about this a little later. V'hu neged shalach na biyad tishlach. The molad halavana, the Kiddush Levana, corresponds to Moshe's words of shalach na biyad tishlach. Send, please, with the one you usually send. Shelo yiyehu hamevi v'hamelech, which meant that Moshe was saying, I'm going to pass on the opportunity to bring the people out of Mitzrayim and into Eretz Yisrael and be their melech and be their king. I'm passing on the chance to do that because Hashem, I think you should send someone else. So we see already a connection, at least a glimpse of a connection between the Levana, the new moon, and the mitzvah connected to it, which has to do, the Zera Shimshon says, with the kingdom of Israel, the king of Malchus Yisrael, and Moshe's passing on the chance to lead Bnei Yisrael and saying to Hashem, Shlach na biyad tishlach. Od niskashev b'menorah. Moshe also had a problem with the menorah, v'hu neged lama hariosa, and that corresponds to when he said, why have you done evil to the people? Be'od bishkolim, and Moshe also had a problem with the mitzvah of machzis hashekel, neged ha'erev rav, and that corresponds to the erev rav. So in this paragraph, Zera Shimshon just makes the three connections between the incidents in which Moshe sinned and the three items, you might say, or the three situations in which Moshe had a problem. And now in the coming paragraphs, he's going to explain in detail the connections between those things. V'zehu be'uram, next paragraph, and this is their explanation. Dover boror hu, it is a clear thing, shahalavana mismales umischaseres, that the moon becomes full and then decreases. Anybody can look up in the sky at night, which maybe we don't do enough, and see that during the during the night, we'll see the moon start off small and get bigger and bigger until it's full, and then start to decrease and get smaller and smaller until it's no longer visible. And then the cycle starts over and over again. And that's the cycle, of course, of the lunar calendar, of the lunar months. Vehidugmas Eretz Yisrael. This is similar, or this symbolizes the land of Eretz Yisrael. Shemishula Litzvi. The land of Eretz Yisrael is compared to a deer. Some people translate it as a gazelle. But either way, it's called Eretz Hatzvi. Eretz Yisrael is called the land of the deer, or the land of the gazelle. She'ein oro machazik es besoro. The skin of a deer is not actually big enough to hold all of its flesh. What the Zera Shimshon means there is that when you shecht a deer, when you slaughter a deer and you take off its skin, you skin it, the skin contracts. And very soon after you've removed the skin from the animal, if you were to try and put it back on the animal, it would be back on the deer, it would no longer be anywhere near large enough to cover the deer as it did before you killed the deer and skinned it. So its skin is not sufficiently big enough by itself to cover the deer, and it can only do so in life. And then once it's removed, it contracts. And the Zera Shimshon now compares that to Eretz Yisrael. Bizman sheyoshveha aleha, when the inhabitants, meaning the Jewish people, are on the land of Israel, ravecha, it expands. Ein yoshveha aleha, when Bnei Yisrael are not inhabiting the land of Israel, gomda, it contracts. So Eretz Yisrael itself gets larger and smaller in the sense that the more of Klal Yisrael, the more Jewish people who come there, the more it expands, the more people it can house and service and provide for. However, if the people leave, then it contracts and is not large enough. It doesn't appear large enough to supply for the people. However, when they come back, it will expand again. So that already is the first connection between the moon and Eretz Yisrael, the moon cycle and Eretz Yisrael. Ucheneged tesva of yomim harishonim shel halavana. Also, an additional comparison corresponding to the 15th day of the month, the first 15 days of every month, when the moon starts off as a sliver and slowly increases up to full size. Hayutesvav doros me Avraham ad Shlomo. This corresponds to the 15 generations that existed between Avram Avinu and Shlomo, meaning that from Avram Avinu, the moon, the light of the Jewish people began to shine, and it was slowly increasing and building until it reached its apogee with Shlomo HaMelech, 15 generations. Sha'oz kaima sihara ba'ashlamusa. And then in the 15th day, the moon exists in its full form. Kediisa b'Zohar, as it states in the Zohar. Ucheneged tesvav yomim ha'achronim, corresponding to the 15 latter days of the month, from the middle of the month to the end of the month, shehi peguma, which is when the moon slowly gets smaller, hayu tesvav doros me rechavam ad tzidkiyahu. That represents the 15 generations from Shlomo HaMelech's son Rechavam up until Tzidkiyahu, the king Tzidkiyahu, Shesime Nebuchadnezzar es Einov, who Tzidkiyahu captured and blinded. He took out Tzidkiyahu's eyes. Dugmas halavana, which is symbolized by the moon, Shem mischasheches, which gets darker and darker during the last 15 days of the month. Tzidkiyahu was the last of the kings before the Chorban Bayis Rishon. So we have 15 generations of growth and flourishing from Avraham to Shlomo, and then we have a slow decline starting with Shlomo's son Rechavam, which represents the time when the Jewish people split into two different kingdoms, a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom, and that tragic state of affairs continued on all the way up until the time of Tzidkiyahu HaMelech, when when, as we said, Nebuchadnezzar came and destroyed the first Beis Hamikdash and brought the Jews into exile, into Golus Bovel. And it's like what is stated in the Yalkut Shimoni on Divrei Hayamim, Daf Kuf Samach Aleph Amud Daled, Im Zechisem, if you merit it, Atem Monim Lemilua Shel Levana. If you merit it, you will experience things like when the moon is full. Dichsiv HaChodesh Hazeh Lochem. As the pasuk says, this renewal, this month, but also the word renewal will be for you. If you merit it, the Jewish people will be renewed and full and strong and flourishing. Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Yehuda, Peretz, V'chule, and you'll follow the generations like the first 15 generations of Jews from Avraham up to David HaMelech and then Shlomo. V'im lav, and if not, atem monim lepigimosa, then you will count your days and your experiences like when the moon is decreasing, when it's waning. Rechavam, Avia, Osa, and you'll go from Rechavam the king to the next king, Avia to the next king, Osa, V'chule, etc., until just lower and lower declines until the Chorban Bayis Rishon, V'ayin Sham, and look there. So we see here the connection between the moon and the first thing that Moshe Rabbeinu had which was the first thing that Moshe Rabbeinu had difficulty with with the mitzvah of Kiddush HaChodesh, and we see how the moon very much symbolizes the kingship and the kings over Bnei Yisrael, both in terms of the growth and flourishing, but also in terms of the decline, and that's the waxing and waning of the moon. That leads us to the next paragraph. If Moshe would have led them into Eretz Yisrael, then the inhabitants of the land, meaning Bnei Yisrael, would have stayed on the land forever. If Moshe took the Jewish people into Israel, there would have been no Chorban, there would have been no Golus. Because Moshe, would have planted them in the land permanently. Kanoda, as is well known. V'samid ha'yisah ha'memshala b'Yisrael, and the kingship over Bnei Yisrael, the Malchus, would have been eternal. V'lo haya necharav habayis, and the first Beis Hamikdash would not have been destroyed, and there would have been that Beis Hamikdash would have continued. V'ha'yisah ha'levana b'milua, and that would have been represented by the moon in its fullness. V'lochein, and therefore, kishe'amar lo hakadosh baruch hu hachodesh hazeh lochem, when Hashem said to Moshe, this sliver of a moon is the sign of a new month, and you should sanctify it each month, Dimash Meloshon Chidush, which implies that the moon was going to be renewed each month, Shahalavana Mischadeshes, the moon would be renewed, Niskashel Moshe. That idea was difficult for Moshe to understand. Ve'ozhera lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and so Hashem showed him Yisrael yiglu miyal admosam, that in the future Bnei Yisrael would go into exile and would be exiled from their land. V'hu lo yachnisem la'aretz, which Moshe indicated that he would not take them into the land. Dahainu shelo yihiyeh hamevi ve'hamolich, he would not be the one to bring them in and to rule over them as their king. So Moshe's statement of send someone else, send the one you usually send, had incredibly earth-changing ramifications, because it led to Moshe not leading the Jewish people into Eretz Yisrael, which ultimately started a cycle of growth and power, and then decline and decay, ultimately with the Chorban Bayis Rishon, later a Chorban Bayis Sheni, and it brought in the experience of exile. And so all kinds of very, very tragic events followed upon the fact that Moshe was not able to lead Bnei Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael. Od b'mitzvah ha-menorah ksiv, it's also written regarding the mitzvah of the menorah. Now Zera Shimshon is going to segue from his discussion about the menorah, which was the first thing that Moshe had a problem with. Now Zera Shimshon is going to move to a discussion of the menorah, represented by ner in the abbreviation from the word nechoshet in the beginning. Od b'tzivoy ha-menorah. So additionally, to move to the next aspect that Moshe had a problem with was the commandment of the menorah. And it's written te'aseh, b'yud, with a yud. Normally, we find the word te'aseh written without a yud, just tough ayin sin hey. But here, regarding the menorah, it's written with a yud, tough yud ayin sin hey. Delays de chavose be'oraisa, that there's no other example like this in the Torah. If we look through the Torah, the Zera Shimshon says we're only going to see the word te'aseh written with a yud regarding the menorah of the construction of the menorah of the Mishkan. The Omru b'medrash, and Chazal said in a medrash, who remez le'eser menoros. This letter yud, which stands for the number 10 in gematria, its numerical value of yud is a 10, hints to the 10 menorot she'asa Shlomo that Shlomo made for the first Beis HaMikdash. Shlomo didn't just make one menorah like we have in the description of the Mishkan. He made 10 menorahs. Top of the next column. V'hasifsei Kohen, and the commentary on Chumash called the Sifsei Kohen, Nosan Tam. He gives the reason why Shlomo made 10. Lama Shlomo asa eser menoros. Why did Shlomo make 10 menoros? Uva Mishkan lo osu ela achas, but in the Mishkan they only had one. Lefi shebimei Shlomo, because in the days of Shlomo, hayu kol ha'umos kifufim tachtav. All of the nations of the world were subjugated in front of him. Sheshlomo molach al ha'elyonim v'al ha'tachtonim. Shlomo ruled over the upper realms and the lower realms. We know that every nation in the world of the 70 basic nations has a malach to look out for its interests, to advocate for it in Shemayim. Moshe ruled over those advocates, those angelic advocates, and ruled over the nations themselves down here on earth. Umishum hachi asa eser menoros. That's why he made 10 menoros. Kula mishiva neros. Each menorah had 7 neros, which of course is how the menorah was described in the Torah, to have 7 candles, a middle light and 3 lights on each side. Shehem shivim neros, and that equals a total of 70 candles. 10 menorahs times 7 lamps on each one is a total of 70. Kedei lehachal ishkoach shivim umos. Shlomo did this very consciously with the intent to weaken the strength of the 70 primary nations of the world that he wanted to rule over and ruled over. Aval bamidbar, but in the midbar, in the wilderness, lo hayu tzrichim lahachnia, they did not need to subdue el shiva amamim, the 7 nations shahayu be'eretz Yisrael that were in Eretz Yisrael at that time, in Eretz Canaan. So the people in the midbar were not thinking, let's rule over 70 nations of the world as Shlomo would do in the future. They were thinking, God willing, we'll get to Eretz Canaan and we'll be able to conquer the 7 nations that are there. And that's why they only made 1 menorah in the midbar and for the Mishkan, mishiva neros, 1 menorah with 7 candles, in order to weaken and allow them to subjugate and conquer the 7 nations that lived in Eretz Canaan at that time. Ad kan Lishono, until here is a quote from the commentary Sifsei Kohen. Next paragraph. Uchashero Moshe shehakodesh Baruch Hu eno mitzavelo lasos rak menorah achas. When Moshe saw that Hashem told him to make only 1 menorah, lo hayemevin atam, he didn't understand the reason. Shahayusoveh shetzarech eser menoros. Moshe himself thought there would be a need for 10 menoros. Kedei lahachnia kol hashivim umos b'shivim neros, in order to subdue the 70 nations of the world with the 70 lamps. V'hirelo hakadosh baruch hu tsuras hamenorah. Hashem showed Moshe the form of the menorah. Klomar, that means to say, Ein tzorech rak lemenorah achas, means Hashem showed Moshe that all he would need in the Mishkan would be 1 menorah. Mipnei sha'ata osid lomus, because Moshe, you are going to die. Umitchila tzorech lahachlish koach sheva umos. And therefore, all you need to worry about is phase 1 of the program, which is to weaken the 7 nations in Eretz Canaan. V'acher kach, and after you die, Yovo Yehoshua v'yomis lamed aleph malachim. Yehoshua will lead the people in to defeat the 31 kings. Keminyan el, and 31, lamed aleph, equals the same amount as the word el, lashon kosher, which is a language that means hard, difficult, strong. Kedichsiv, as the pasuk says, v'es ele haaretz lokach, and the powerful ones of the land he took. Va'achar kach, and afterwards Yovo Shlomo. Later on in the future, Shlomo will come, v'yachalish hashivim umos, and he will weaken and subjugate the 70 nations of the world. So the menorah, specifically the fact that Moshe was told to only build one menorah, was problematic to Moshe, who wanted to build 10 menorahs, and Hashem needed to explain to him and gently hint to him that he would not be the one to come into Eretz Yisrael, lead the people in, and rule, have the Jewish people rule over all the 70 nations of the world. That would only happen in the future. For Moshe's time, it was enough to have one menorah so that the goal would be to defeat the 7 nations in Eretz Canaan, and even that goal would not be accomplished by Moshe, but would be accomplished after his Petira by Yehoshua. Next paragraph. V'im lo haya Moshe omer lo mohariosa. If Moshe had not said the words, "Why have you done bad to this people?" He himself would have lived to go into the land and see the battle against the 31 kings. The Sekef haya machnia kol hashivim umos, and immediately Moshe would have led Bnei Yisrael into subjugating the 70 primary nations of the whole world. If that would have been the case, then Moshe could have made 10 menorahs. Because all of the repair that needed to get done would have all happened at one time. Bishvil zechuso shehoyo ish echad, in Moshe's merit, because he was one person, meaning that this whole idea of phases and stages that actually took place, there was the role that Moshe played, and then Yehoshua, and then all the generations that led up to Shlomo HaMelech. All of those stages and phases wouldn't have been necessary. Moshe, the one person, would have led Bnei Yisrael into Eretz Canaan, conquered it, and ushered in, built the Beis HaMikdash, and there would have been no more Golus and no more destruction, and the Jewish people would have reigned supreme from then onward. But that did not happen. Next paragraph. V'av kisheshama Moshe shehakodesh baruch hu tziva olav al machzis hashekel. And so too, when Moshe heard the command from Hashem about the half shekel, the mashma she'ein olam mole, ve'ein Hashem mole, the fact that the mitzvah was given on half a shekel implied that the world was incomplete and Hashem's name was somehow incomplete. Hukshalo. This presented a difficulty to Moshe. V'halo imhu yachnisam la'aretz yeh olam mole. Moshe knew that if he would lead them into Eretz Yisrael, the world would be full and Hashem's name could be full. So why was the mitzvah commanded with a machzis hashekel, with a half a shekel? Next paragraph. V'hera lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu matbea shel eish. Hashem showed Moshe a coin of fire, umishkalo machzis hashekel, and its value or its weight was half shekel. Lomar, to say to Moshe, shehu lo yachnisem la'aretz. This was the third hint to Moshe that he would not bring the people into the land. Shekosav asifsei chohen. The commentary again of the Sifsei Chohen wrote, Sheshekel be'atbash gematria chavvav. The word shekel, using the gematria form of atbash, which is where you replace each letter with a letter that is at the opposite end of the aleph bet. For example, aleph becomes tough and bet becomes shin, and you can see that with the words atbash. So if you use gematria in that form, the value of the word shekel, shin kuf lamed, turns out to equal 26. Keda'omer Rabbi Elazar, as Rabbi Elazar said, Miyom shecharav Beis HaMikdash, from the day the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, dayo la'olam sheyishtamesh b'shtei osios. It's enough for the world to only use 2 letters of Hashem's 4-letter name. The me'achar she'ein olam mole, with the Beis Hamikdash being destroyed, the world cannot be considered full or complete. Ein ro'oi she'yikare Hashem ella al olam mole. It's not appropriate to use the 4-letter name of Hashem unless the world is complete. Kemoshe amru zichronim levracha. This is similar to what Chazal said. Ki lo himtir Hashem Elokim, Hashem Elokim, and that means the 4-letter name of Hashem, the Yud, the Hey, and then the Vav, and then the Hey, Elokim. Those 2 words together were used in a pasuk in Bereshis Perek Beis pasuk Hey, as you can see. Shem Mole Olam Mole. There, Hashem's full 4-letter name was used because it was a full name on a full world. Why was it considered a full world at that point? Shelo hoya adayin avodah zara ba'olam. Idol worship did not exist in the world. Shehi sheker. Idol worship, idolatry, is the ultimate falsehood. V'shem havaya, and the 4-letter name of Hashem, more amitus v'havaya. It teaches us. It depicts truth and reality. And avodah zara is the opposite of truth and reality. Umizeh hatam ein nikra Hashem and from this same reason, we don't read the word of Hashem as it's written, ela bechinuyo. Rather, we use another word in its place. When we see the word a yud, a hey, composed of the yud and the hey and the vav and the hey in the Torah, when we're reading the Torah, let's say, or if we're reading Psukim, we don't pronounce that word, of course. We know that we teach children from a young age not to pronounce the word the way it's written, but rather to say the word that is formed with the letters Aleph, Dalid, Nun, Yud. That's what we say when we see the 4-letter name of Hashem. That's a replacement word, and so we can't say the real word of Hashem at this stage in history. Ulefisha osu ha'egel, and because they made the golden calf, lozeh omar, that's why Hashem said sheyitnu machasis hashekel. They should only give a half shekel coin because the Egel brought avodah zara and Yetzer Hara back and to the world and into the Jewish people, and therefore things were broken, and they should only bring a half shekel. V'zehu haneged erev rav, and this corresponds to the mixed multitude she'osu ha'egel. They made the Egel v'heviu avodah zara b'Yisrael, and they brought avodah zara to the Jewish people. Ki the Isa Shamba Perik Daled Avodah Zara, Dafnan Gimel, as it states there, and the Meseches Avodah Zara, Midapalchu Yisrael Egel, from the time the Jewish people were involved in the worship of the Egel, Golu Adataihu Denichaluhu Ba'avodah Zara. It revealed and showed that they were comfortable with avodah zara, meaning there should have been such a complete and immediate rejection of the Egel Hazav by the entire Jewish people that only the Erev Rav would have tried to make it, and everyone would have immediately rejected that and have done whatever would be necessary to put an end to the Egel Hazav and its adherents right away. But that didn't happen. The fact is that they let the Egel Hazav stay around, and some Jews even joined in the ceremonies and the celebrations, and that showed that there was a comfort level with avodah zara. V'zehu, next paragraph, and this will be our last paragraph. V'zehu ner chodesh shkolim tireh, and this is what is represented by the last word in Parsha's Truma, ner chodesh shkolim tireh, a candle, meaning the menorah, chodesh, meaning the mitzvah of Rosh Chodesh, shkolim, and the machzis hashekel mitzvah tireh. Moshe, you will see those 3 things. You will understand all 3 of them. Ve'ata Tetzaveh, and then you will go into the Parsha of Ata Tetzaveh, where your name is not mentioned. Klomar, this means to say, De lo huzkar shem Moshe beParsha zo. Your name is not going to be mentioned in the Parsha of Tetzaveh right after the word Nechoshes. Lahoros lanu, to teach us, Sheme'elu, top of the next column, Shlosha Devarim, from these 3 things, Yada Moshe knew, Sheyitzias Nishmaso Tihiyeh B'chutz La'aretz, that his soul would leave him while he was still in Chutz La'aretz, V'yiyeh Nelam Me'ein Kol Chai, and he would be hidden, meaning he would die and be hidden. His burial place would be hidden from the eyes of all living things. So Hashem hinted to Moshe with these three things, each one which he had tremendous, profound difficulties with and understanding and accepting, that he would not lead the Jewish people into Eretz Yisrael, and rather he would die chutz la'aretz. The rest of this piece talks about some additional ideas and actually also goes off on a different discussion of what one of the three things could be substituted for a different item. And I encourage everyone to look at the end on their own. But we've certainly covered the basic ideas that the Zera Shimshon wanted to share with us on this week's piece. Yasher koach to everyone for joining us this week. We look forward, God willing, to learning again in the Zera Shimshon next week.